Ben Hamer, how are you, my friend?
I am doing very good. How are you?
Mate, very well. Excited to talk to you. You were introduced to me through mutual connection of ours, Saxton, the speaking organisation. And they
Yep.
sent me a message or an email, I should say, saying, we think it'd be great if you spoke to Ben Hamer, the futurist. And the first question that popped in my mind, which I'll ask you now,
What is
what
a
is a
futurist?
futurist?
Yeah, look, not the first time I've ever been asked that. And my parents still ask me that as well. So much so my parents ask me it that they just say that I either work in HR or marketing because it's easier for them to try and describe to their friends. So I'll start by saying it's not HR or marketing. Basically, like I'm in a pretty privileged position where what I do for work is I do a whole lot of research. I consume a whole lot of content and news that really gives an indication as to where we're going as a world, how we're going to live, work, and play in the future. Like, so lots of trends, lots of cool stories and case studies and innovations of what we see today that paint a picture of what tomorrow might look like. And then the work that I do with that is whether it's through my own podcast, speaking, sort of consulting and advisory work, it's working with people and organizations to understand what's coming so that they can prepare now today for what's next.
That's an incredible explanation. What a great answer. And I think the thing that probably intrigues me the most about that is when the topic futurist or future pops up, it is certainly something that concerns all of us. And you just mentioned there the topics of live, work, play. I guess to dive into your curiosity behind that, like how do you get into this work and go, hey, this is something I want to dive into deeper, but something I want to become an expert or, as you are, a doctor in?
Yeah, I think for me, like, so my there is some legitimacy in what my parents say. I did start out working in HR, and then I kind of wanted to kind of play a little bit more into sort of, well, where are we going in terms of organizations and their people? And so that's where I started to go into the future of work. And then one step further, I just kind of kept scratching that itch and exploring that curiosity around wanting to get broader and broader. And so that's kind of where I went into the space of broader futures thinking and working as a futurist. And where sort of my passion comes from is that I think there are a lot of people that are really pessimistic or cynical about the future. And I think there are a lot of people who are futurists who, not to be disrespectful, but sort of perpetuate that. Like they talk about all the risks and concerns and the dark side of AI and everything else. But through my work, I see so many really, really awesome examples that give me hope for the future and make me someone who's really optimistic about what's to come. So I guess my goal is to really try and balance out the conversation that people are having where their default tends to be what if things go wrong, and my default tends to be, well, what if things go right? And so like one example of that is in India, right? They deployed facial recognition glasses across the police force, and automatically everyone goes, police have facial recognition tech, what if things go wrong? Whereas what if things go right? They uploaded the faces of missing children and they found over 3,000 missing kids on the streets in a couple of months. And that's the sort of stuff that I'm drawn to. And it's not the stuff that makes the front page of the news, but they're the stories that I want to promote and that I want to see more of. And if we tap into the secret source of that, how can we do more and more to create a better future for everyone?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because you're so right. When I talk about the present, I'm very optimistic. Sometimes when I talk about the future, I'm not specifically my future, but the future of the world. It's easy to buy into those pessimistic stories we read and the things that scare us and those scare tactics that play out in media. If we talk about work specifically, probably one of the biggest shifts in our working culture over the last couple of years happened off the back of COVID. We found ourselves forced inside, and off the back of that forced home time, we started to develop more mobile working situations where we were doing either a split in office and at home, or where some people completely transitioned to home. It feels like in the last 6 months, especially in New South Wales, there's been a push towards getting people back in the office. Do you see that as a long-term trend, or do you think that we're going to find ourselves in a greater balance in future?
Yeah, it's a big one. I'd say sort of in the workspace, it's been the topic of conversation over the last couple of years. Where we are today, people are spending about 3.5 days a week in the office and the rest from home. There's been a whole heap of organizations that have mandated it. The New South Wales public sector is the largest employer in the Southern Hemisphere, and they recently came out and mandated it as well. And so you have got these mandates for people to come in, but this idea of hybrid working, which is where you work across the office, but home, cafes, third spaces like co-working spaces, whatever, this idea of hybrid is here to stay. So whether or not that's, 1 day at home, 5 days, 4 days at home, some kind of variation, it's going to differ depending on the kind of work that you do, the kind of organization you work for. But some kind of hybrid working is going to be the new normal that will stick around.
It's really interesting because I think that when you give people a little bit of lead, it's very hard to take it back from them. And personally, I'm one of those workers who I work not from a home capacity, except when I'm doing the podcast and that kind of jazz. But when I'm an employee, I'm mostly in the office, and my job is a little bit more dynamic than most, where I get to leave, do appointments and come back in. But God, I like a bit of freedom, and I get a bit of freedom at work. And I just think it would be so hard for me to be confined to an office again. So when we're starting to consider what the future will look like, I sometimes wonder whether that is whether the workers' points of views or feelings and opinions are taken on board, because I get the sense that there's maybe a little bit of a push to get people back into the city to boost the economy and get the cafes and the restaurants around workplaces happening again. Do you think it's got anything to do with the economy?
100%. There's so much at play. So the New South Wales public sector, as an example, when they came out with their mandate, the Premier said it was a large reason was because of the economy. I don't buy into that as much, in the sense that, well, basically what you're doing is, instead of people buying their coffee from their local barista, they're now buying it in the CBD. What happens to the local barista? They're still spending the same amount of money. It's just that it's being spent somewhere else. And so you're just kind of shifting the problem around. But it does get pitched as one of the reasons. Another reason is a little bit more transactional, which is we're paying rent for a building that people aren't coming in to use. And so we don't think we're getting value for money. So come in. Another reason is that they think that people are more productive working in an office versus working from home. And then another reason kind of comes down to ego, to be honest, which is leaders like feeling important. They've had years of walking around the floor where, based on sort of people's nonverbal reactions to them, they might straighten up, they might kind of give them a look, they might give them some space. There's all these nonverbal cues that give to someone that oh, I think you're important, I think you're a big deal, I'm intimidated by whatever it might be. But working from home, we all operate or all occupy the same piece of real estate on a screen. So it levels the playing field, and ego doesn't like that. So some leaders want people back in to scratch the itch there. But then on the other end of the spectrum, when it comes to leaders, leading people who are at home, in the office, in different spaces, it's really hard, it's really complex, and it's much easier to just say, everyone get back in.
Do you think that over the course of, do you think that because of the change that we've experienced off the back of COVID, that I almost think before 2020, people wanted those Google-style workplace experiences where it was funky at work, we had different zones, we encouraged almost inter-office socialization and inter-office flexibility, and people then got a taste of, hey, flexibility and a dressing gown and a bit of lunchtime Netflix isn't bad either. What do you think people would prefer this day and age?
I think people want choice, right? So it's less around the idea of play and sort of whether it's a ping pong table in the office or a dressing gown at home. People like choice, and they like having the agency or the autonomy to make that choice. They don't like being told what to do, and particularly off the back of COVID-19 and lockdowns where we were forced to stay in, people don't like being told you can do this and you can't do this anymore. And so I think that's what it comes down to. But yeah, the other end of it, or sort of another way of looking at it, is that traditionally the office was always seen as transactional. It was about work, it was about productivity, it was about getting stuff done. Whereas the home has always been seen as comfort and safety and security and all of that sort of nicer stuff. And so the way our brain thinks about it, when we're working, but we're working from home, it's less transactional. It's more enjoyable, and so there is an element of that comes into it. But yeah, I think that it comes down around people just want to have the choice and not being told what to do.
Yeah, for sure. And it's hard to, like, in living in Wollongong, an hour away from the city, there are a lot of people who travel to the city for work. And I know a lot of people who have been encouraged to go back into the office, and encouraged is probably a choice word for it. But I look at those people who are now spending anywhere between 3 and 4 hours a day on a train or on transport. And it's such a huge chunk of your life. And when you talk about that freedom or the choice to do things like add a workout in the morning or a dinner with your partner at night, it's really hard for people to wrap their heads around. It almost feels like a loss of freedom and a loss of lifestyle. And I think that's going to be such an interesting scene to watch play out over the next couple of years, to how
Yeah,
we adjust and find the balance in that again. Because you spoke about, the future of not only work, but the future of life and play. And life and play hugely hinges on how our work looks.
yeah.
So this space fascinates me because I think it affects all of us in so many ways.
Well, like
And
you think about it, like Monday to Friday, we spend the vast majority of our waking life working or at work or doing some kind of work. But then you look at sort of Australia as a country, when you compare it around the world, like we more than any other country are obsessed with lifestyle. And so whether or not that's sort of to do with, the majority of us living by the coast, we invest a lot and we spend a lot in things like entertainment, going out for dinner, hanging out with our mates. We really value the time away from work. And so I think that is going to continually creep into how people view jobs, the kind of jobs that they go for, wanting to minimize the commute, all of that sort of stuff.
when you talk about how we tend to invest a lot in entertainment and lifestyle as Australians, is that a comparison to other Western countries, or is it in comparison to, like, when we look at, say, an example being Europe? I think that the Europeans have probably a better balance of life and work yet again.
Yeah, I mean, it's all relative when you look at like the economy, when you look at sort of, in Spain, like that you might say, well, it's great that they have their siesta and all of that sort of stuff, but then they have dinner at 10 p.m. at night. And it's all relative. I mean, you've also got in Europe, parts of Europe that have really, really long and dark winters, which significantly impacts lifestyle. So they make the most of summer, but then winter, it's a whole different ball game. So when we talk about Australia and lifestyle, it is like not necessarily looking at Western countries, but more broadly. But it's not just necessarily about, going out and doing all sort of the Instagram story stuff. It's also just doing the simple stuff like having a barbecue in the backyard with some friends and a bottle of wine, and or just Netflix and chilling, and just this idea that we don't want to be caught spending every hour of every day working. And we actually, in the OECD, rank quite highly in terms of the number of hours that we actually work compared to other countries. And so you then add on something like a commute on top of that for a country that is all about lifestyle, and that's where it starts to get really murky.
Yeah, for sure. I get that. Let's talk about work. One more question here. I want to dive into the future of work and AI. I think
Yeah.
that's a topic around AI that gets a few people very nervous about what the future looks like, especially people in the spaces that they feel they can be in future automated through the use of robots or through the use of just AI technology. How do you see that playing out in countries like Australia over the next 10 years?
Yeah, so as far as where we sit on the global stage with AI, we're a little bit behind the eight ball. Like we're pretty slow in terms of adoption of AI technology. In terms of how I see it play out, though, I mean, if we can pick up our game and get on top of it, it's a massive opportunity. The Australian government did a study they released at the start of the year, and they found that if we do get it right, AI will add $600 billion every year to the Australian economy, which is ridiculously huge. So there is this massive opportunity that sits there. I think a lot of people are well, for two reasons. One, we've been relatively slow adopters in general of technology. As a country, we like to kind of let someone else go first and either succeed or fail, and then we'll kind of make our mind up as to whether or not we want to get on board and it suits us. But the other thing in terms of like AI adoption is we kind of get inundated with this narrative around, as you said, like the robots are coming to take our jobs. Technology is not our friend, all of that sort of thing. And there definitely are things that we want to be wary of, and the questions that we want to ask and we need answers for. But at the end of the day, like, a lot of this is sensationalized. Like, I read one study that said by 2030 up to 70% of jobs today won't exist anymore because of technology, which is complete BS. It might be at a push 5%, but 100% of jobs will have changed in some way, shape, or form because of technology and AI. So AI is not coming to replace jobs. AI is going to change what we do and how we do it. And like, if I look at something really, really simple, right, like a calculator, I've done research around when different tech came on the market and what the impact was. And when the calculator first came on the market, the headlines at the time read that if you're an accountant, you'll need to get a new job because a calculator is going to mean we don't need accountants anymore. But obviously we still have accountants. It's just that they're not spending hours every day manually trying to add up numbers. They're able to do that so quickly that they then have all this time to do much more complex and value adding work. Or, when I was in high school, like, my parents stopped helping me with maths homework around year 8 because they never had a calculator when they learned maths. And so the maths that I was doing, it didn't mean that we have calculators so we don't learn how to do maths anymore. It meant that we do much harder, much more complex maths. And so that's kind of where I see tech like AI impacting work. It's not coming to take our jobs. There will be some people who unfortunately will be displaced, but largely what it is it's going to just transform what we do, and it should be a tool that helps us do our job better.
Yeah, I think that's a really optimistic take on it, which is very characteristic of you. And I love that because I think that there is such a fear around this uncertainty that we have for our future. And I've heard so many conversations around, over the course of the next couple of years, you should start to think about the jobs that can't be replaced by AI. And I think there is probably a lacking in, we should think about how AI can positively impact the way that we do our work. To talk about the podcasting industry in specific, there's tools now that allow you to, utilize AI to merge different camera angles with different microphones and to split camera angles between when I'm talking and then when you're talking. That really makes it more enjoyable around what you do as a podcaster. And I think that that is such a positive spin on it for people to think about how this can positively impact your job and your future as opposed to take away from it.
Yeah, and the other thing, like with what you said, right, like this whole idea of like, what are the jobs that the robots can't take over, put pretty crudely, like, it's really important to remember that technology like AI and automation, it doesn't replace jobs, it looks at tasks. And so that's where you go, well, it could be that every single task that one particular job does gets automated or outsourced and therefore it gets replaced. But that's where it's like the really, really small amount. It's tasks that will get automated or tasks where AI will come in. And like the example you gave around podcasting is perfect, right? Like, it doesn't mean that we don't do podcasting anymore or that we won't have podcast hosts or whatever. It's not just going to be us listening to a whole bunch of AI talk to each other in the future, but it just means that we can focus on better quality podcasts, great conversations, free flowing narrative, all the stuff that makes for a cracking podcast, rather than getting so caught up in the production value and all the other bits and pieces of it all.
Yeah, for sure. There is one thing AI I wanted to talk to you about. I don't know if you've heard anything on this. I think we may have had a brief conversation over the phone about this a couple of weeks ago, but there's this new thing that I've heard about, which is an AI technology. For the life of me, I can't remember the name of it, but essentially it implants feelings of remorse and regret into the minds of prisoners. It's a technology developed out of some Arabic country, I believe, by a tech entrepreneur, that they're thinking may be able to replace time in prison. Have you heard about this?
When you brought it up, that was the first time I'd heard about it, and then I did a little bit of googling and read a little bit more about it. But I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it, but I find it really, really fascinating. Like, we're seeing a lot of stuff at the moment in terms of things like brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs. So, like, you might have heard on the news, Elon Musk and his company Neuralink, how they implant a brain chip into your brain, and then you can control devices like computers with just your thoughts. So there's stuff like that. And then how do you actually sort of the other way around, rather than how do you do brain signals going out to control devices, how do you put signals in, like how do you mimic feelings of remorse, regret, etc. I mean, I think it's a really fascinating and interesting way of looking at it. There's a whole heap around rehabilitation for prisoners that's an interesting space to look into. Like, I think they saw that out of some Scandinavian countries, actually not putting them in prison, but putting them on an island and getting them to do sort of a whole heap of sort of work out in a community was actually far better for rehabilitation and all sorts of stuff. So I think we need to rethink how we do it. And using AI sounds like a cool, interesting way of maybe sort of getting towards the same outcome.
The name just popped into my mind just then for anyone who's interested in diving into that further. It's called Cognify. It's one of those spur of the moment things. I've got the man flu at the moment, so my brain's slower to adjust. So those things come into my mind a couple minutes late. But I find it super interesting, and even the idea and discussion around prisoners on an island, it sounds like a reality show that maths producers will be right onto after they listen to this. When we talk about life and the way that life will change in the future, I know that you've taken an interest on your podcast and some of your social content around the future of property. I find that to be fascinating because, as we know, we sit, a lot of us in Australia and a lot of people on the coast are living in towers more than we ever used to, apartment buildings, and more medium and high density property is taken over in most of the Western world, as opposed to the usual freestanding houses that most of our grandparents grew up in. But really, the inside of a home has looked pretty similar, and so has the outside for the last couple of years. How do you think the future of property will change?
Yeah, okay, we'll tackle this a few different ways. So, keep me in line if I start to go off track. I think if I start with where you were going in terms of, going from freestanding homes to, medium high density, I think we're still going to see that. We're going to be building up a hell of a lot more. We're going to see as well, sort of as we try and maximize space, you'll see sort of shared communal facilities in buildings as well. So what I mean by that is you might have like a communal laundry, but you might also have a communal kitchen and stuff like that. So it might be that in some buildings you really just have like a room, a toilet and a TV, and then the rest is more shared. And that's also because as we see less people enter into marriage and domestic situations or domestic relationships and everything, how do you go about fostering connection and community? So it's not just about how do we try and maximize space or how do we save money? It's also about how do we build connection and community with the people we live with and around. I think that we are going to see more people moving further and further away from the traditional CBD though. Like, we are going to see that urban sprawl continue. But with that, like, a lot of governments are talking about second and third cities. So if you look at Sydney, for example, you've got Parramatta as almost like a second city, and then you've got the likes of Wollongong and Newcastle as these big regional hubs. And so we're going to see more and more of that. So it's not like the further you move away, it just means the further you have to commute into the Sydney CBD. It means that you can kind of go to these second cities or these sort of satellite cities as well. And then if I think like going to the sort of what you then went to in terms of like inside the home, what sort of we're seeing some trends play out is like, we're going to have quarantine rooms in the future, which is sort of off the back of COVID-19, this idea that a room that has a separate entry and exit with different kinds of air ventilation and all sorts of stuff, as we see, pandemics and health issues and all of that stuff. I don't think that will become super common, but I think we will see it. What I do think will become common in the future is there'll be this idea of a tech-free room in a house. So as we see much more smart technology in our homes, and there will be, connected technology in every single room, it will almost be like this, like nostalgic nod to the past, like a reading room almost. Like, you might have a couch, you might have, a bookshelf, you might have board games, basically like your analog room to try and escape all the digital noise. And then we're going to have like new appliances and everything else in our homes as well. So like the one that I think will sort of be the next new appliance that you start to see in about 5 years' time, we'll have like our own little 3D printers in our kitchen for 3D printing food. So you already have like 3D printers printing food today. But yeah, I think sort of it'll be less mass commercial kitchens, and it'll be on a really smaller scale, so that you might want to, if you've got a craving, 3D print a slice of cheesecake or something.
You know what? For the life of me, I still can't get my head around how that works. How do you 3D print a slice of cheesecake? I asked out of curiosity, but also a massive cheesecake fan here. It's the top tier of my dessert list.
So
How does
I
that
hit
work?
something when I said cheesecake.
Yeah.
So basically, what it does is it just like it takes some kind of raw material or ingredient that you're sort of putting into it, and then it's really hard. I was about to do hand gestures and realize we're on a podcast, but like it prints layer on layer on top of each other, so it just goes back and forwards and gradually builds up and up and up. But it can sort of build intricate cake decorations. It can build so many different layers. So you could have like a triple choc cheesecake that has like dark milk, white chocolate layered on top of each other. But yeah, it's basically just like this robot that goes up and down and back and forwards and until you have what you want.
So it's basically like your nan. You give it the ingredients and it spits out incredible baked goods.
I mean, I wouldn't say they're incredible at the moment, but I think that like as the tech gets better and better, I think it'll be a pretty cracking substitute. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I want to go back. So you mentioned around the future of property and these ideas of shared communal spaces. I think it sounds very similar to what we see. I've never experienced it firsthand, but I've seen photos and heard people talk about their experiences of those kind of pod style hotels in Asian countries like Japan, where people almost have a pod shaped bed and then they have all of these communal spaces for bathrooms and kitchens and the like. One thing that I'm interested in, have you seen any examples of this in countries like Australia or America or across the UK where there have been early adopters of this in the development space? Because it sounds really intriguing. I just wonder who's courageous enough to make the first move.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you do see like overseas those pods, and even like pop-in meeting rooms, phone booths, whether or not it's to get a bit of shut eye. Like they're more so around function. Like you need something for you just want to pop in, pop out for a period of time. Whereas something that's more enduring, like your living arrangement, is a bit of a bigger deal. I think like the way I think about it is similar to what you see in a lot of like universities with their on-campus accommodation. So it's a little bit like that, where you might have, I don't want to think about it as a dorm room. It's a little bit like you'd still have like your own mini studio apartment, but a little bit like that. So I haven't seen any myself in terms of like residential, but I think it's just an extension of like that on-campus accommodation model where you might have a communal rec room downstairs which has a foosball table and table tennis. You might have a TV room where they have movie nights and everything. Massive communal kitchen where everyone has their own section in a fridge and they have their own station that they can go and cook at. And then there's massive communal dining table where you can all sit together and eat, but then you can still retreat and have your own space where you sleep and sort of unwind.
It's really interesting, and all this stuff kind of fascinates me because it's so left of center. At least it feels like that right now. That I'm
Well,
intrigued, especially I'm in the property space, right? Like in real estate,
mm,
and I find it so funny, especially in Wollongong. I get the shit sometimes because I walk around, and you're like, "Here's the next apartment building going up," and I know it's going to look exactly like the one across the road because council don't like to do anything that's different or unique. And I know that it's probably going to have the same features and they're going to cost the same amount of money. And it's really interesting that I think in some areas, the Gold Coast do apartments way better than we do here. They have character and style, and they often give you something a little bit different to what the one across the road does.
I was gonna say I haven't heard the Gold Coast as being described as having character and style before, so heard it here
In their new
first.
apartments, they do. In their new apartments, they're far more risque in the way that they design and develop.
Yeah,
But
cool.
here, everything is so similar, and it frustrates me. So I'm really intrigued. Like, who's going to be the first person in Wollongong to put the communal spaces that offer those kind of communal everyday living services?
Yeah, I
Because
think
that's
like
fascinating.
part of it's going to come down like just based on pure necessity, though, right? Like it just means that if we have those communal services, or like hubs and facilities in buildings, it means you can fit more studios or more apartments or more residential sort of one bedrooms things in there. So it could be because of space that's going to be the driver. It could be because of cost of living, because it's going to be cheaper, and we get to a point where financially we just have to go down that model to house people. And as I said again, like you've just got the rise in the number of people who are living by themselves or not, entering into domestic partnerships and relationships and everything. And it could be then just pure loneliness and connection, where it sort of becomes the driver. So I think there will also be. I don't think it'll just be like a private led initiative. I think there will also sort of be a government angle where it's because of mental health and loneliness. It's because of cost of living. It's because of whatever other sort of reason that the government will also sort of start to lean in and incentivize and encourage the development there as well.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, especially on the point of affordability, because man, it's getting harder than ever, especially if you live close to a city or if you're in one of these regional hubs like Wollongong or
I say
Newcastle, where,
Wollongong's expensive.
mate, it is pricey as.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about how far the property market has come in the last couple of years, and I am constantly faced with the problem of my job is to sell this for as much as possible, but that means that everything feels more expensive for me and Soph as we look to the future in a family. And
Yeah.
it's a crisis that I know every young person in Australia is starting to consider and experience. There's actually two guys that I had on the podcast recently that host a podcast called Equity Mates, all around finance, Bryce and Ren. And they were saying there's a term that's been coined as the Coachella effect in the US, where they've seen as affordability crisis has been a part of the US experience as well for young people. They are starting to almost abandon the idea of those traditional, I guess, goals that their parents had of buying a property by a certain age and setting up their life, and rather they're looking to spend money on experiences like VIP tickets to Coachella and VIP travel to Coachella, where it's almost like a disregard for the future at all, and rather just the very present, enjoy my time and spend my money, which as a
Yeah.
young person, I feel a sense of. I feel this like, let's just live while we're young because we can't afford a house now anyways. But then you also have to consider that doesn't help tomorrow. So it's such a fine
Yeah.
balance.
I mean, I think there's like I don't disagree, but I think there's more going on to it as well, right? Like as you sort of alluded to, where we're not getting married as young as we used to. We're not buying homes as much as as early as we used to, and so because of that, we don't value financial stability, financial security as much as our parents' generation as well. Which is why you're also seeing our parents, they used to have the job for life, employer for life. You basically started at one company as an 18-year-old and you retired with that company 40 years later. Whereas now we're changing jobs every 2 years. We're always changing companies. We don't see this sense of, but what if I don't have a job and I can't pay my mortgage? And like we're not as sort of driven by those sorts of things as previous generations. And so because of that, it means that, we have more of that financial freedom that comes with it. And then there's also, as you said, the desire to want to live life and spend it on experiences and everything as well. And I fall into that category. My partner probably less so. And so I feel the heat sometimes, but yeah.
It's interesting, right? And it's an interesting conversation that we are certainly products of our parents, whether that be that our parents have had. I think so. Let me just think about the way that I want to coin this. So I had a very amazing childhood, very middle class. Grew up in a double-story brick home.
Oh, double story. It's
Double
fancy.
story, yeah, double brick home. Very
Wow.
middle
Flex.
class suburban Australian in a cul-de-sac street, and we didn't live in a very fancy area. We lived in a relatively affordable suburb by even today's standards, but it was a great home and a safe street, and we went to a good school. And because my parents predominantly stayed in the same industries for most of their life and were very provided a lot of security and stability, I see in my sister and myself, me being 2.5 years her elder, this very I guess is very like spontaneous. Go and explore this job for a couple of years, try the next one, go on a holiday, spend our money. And there's certainly some of those more traditional goals too within us around the ideas of, having relationship and, looking towards the future with some plans. But we are privileged that our parents provided so much stability. It almost gives you the confidence to go and experience life and do it a little bit
Mm,
differently. Where I see in, say, for example, my mum grew up as one of 5 children or 6 children. She had a stepbrother as well. And she didn't come from a lot of money, where her mum and dad were sort of pretty tight, and they had a pretty, I guess, a pretty challenging upbringing financially. And so my mum has always been a very hard worker and doesn't know how to stop. And my mum spends her money on us and loves to spoil her kids and put on beautiful dinners and all of that stuff. And she's certainly not a tight ass by any stretch of the imagination, but she's secure with her money and she likes the
yeah,
security of her work. And she works very hard when she's there.
yeah.
And I notice how she is almost the product of a more challenging financial upbringing, and now she hangs on to security. I wonder that when we consider the future of our next generations, whether because we're a little bit more fruitful with our spending and a little less traditionally tight and secure with our money, do you think it will be the inverse effect?
Um, like it's hard to say, because you also, without wanting to get to like economicsy about it, like it also depends on like the, what's happening in the world in terms of markets, in terms of, geopolitics. Like, for example, our parents' generation, they were kids of parents who lived through war. And so that's also kind of something that feeds into this idea of wanting to stockpile wealth and all sorts of other stuff, like the save it for a rainy day fund, that kind of thing. You look at some of the sort of economic factors into the future. You've got kids like Gen Z and Gen Alpha. They're not going to be buying a house until they're about 40. Right? Like, I go back to my parents, the average house was around 3 times the average salary. In Sydney, it's about 12 times the average salary now.
Mm.
So it's harder and harder to buy homes. They're going to be buying homes even later for the next generation. The next generation also are, in some respects, more fluid and carefree as well. Like, if you think about like ideas around sexuality and gender and all that sort of stuff, they're a lot less bound by this idea of doing what's expected of them. And so whether that's in sort of relationships, whether that's in terms of careers, like we see a lot of Gen Z who go straight from university to their own startup. You see a lot of Gen Alpha kids in schools these days. You ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? A hell of a lot of them say an influencer. So I think in that regard, like, I don't know, I don't necessarily see them doing the reverse and going back to being more like our parents and trying to hang back onto things. What I do see from them though is there's sort of these countercultural trends around nostalgia is really big with them. So going back to what I said about like the tech free room, like they're very big on this idea of like, we've seen CD sales go up for the first time in 20 years. We've seen magazine sales go up for the first time in forever. Like, they want to go back to analog. So there's something around that. It's almost like doing the inverse, but around technology. And they're in a world that's becoming more and more curated, like in terms of like Instagram content and filters and all of that stuff. They're all about the pursuit of radical authenticity and self-expression and being done with filters and just calling it like you see it and going live and appreciating your blemishes and all that sort of stuff. So I see them sort of reverting in that regard, less around sort of views around security and stability.
I wish more people appreciated my pimples when I was 14 or 15, mate. It would have made life a lot easier.
Wait, before we go on though, what's like your mum's go-to dish? You said that she's an amazing cook. What's the go-to? What's the best one?
Oh, that's a great question because there's a few. So
You can give like a top three.
So my mum's one of the 3 women in her family. She's got 2 sisters. So the 3 sisters together, all amazing cooks. They all have different strengths.
Okay.
My mum, I'd say, is a very good all-rounder. My mum can cook a great cheesecake. And I've
There we
spoken
go.
of my love of cheesecake already in this episode, more than I ever have on a podcast, to be fair. So she does an amazing cheesecake. She does a great lasagna, which we've just had for the last 2 nights because we took the leftovers from Tuesday.
Wait, does she make her own sheets, or does she store buy sheets, like the lasagna sheets?
I'd love to tell you that I'm around for the process. I've got
Okay.
a feeling they're probably store bought
And I'm
because
not like judging that. I'm just like, I'd take a good recommendation if they are store bought.
I wish I could give you that. I'll hunt that down for you.
If you can ask Mum and Dad and get back to me.
I will. She also does. She does like great salad, and like I love going to Mum's for some salmon, an incredible salad. We call it the Carmine salad because you know that surely you've been to that restaurant in New York, Carmine's, the family
No,
diner that does the massive meals.
no.
Okay, I think it's on 8th Street. It's great. If you ever get to New York, like I've been there solo, and it's not a solo outing. Let me tell you, you need a couple
Okay.
of people to finish a meal. But they've got a salad there that's like rocket, cranberries, walnuts, feta, and pear. Oh, Mum does such a good Carmine salad. So like that. But I just love going to Mum's. There's always a bit of country music on YouTube. Just
Okay.
video clips rolling through. There's a great story actually that I'll indulge you in. My mum loves music. She's very, very similar to me, very extroverted and lots of energy and loves a chat. And so you can imagine that there's no silence at the dinner table when we're there. And there's always some music in the background and mum's singing while we're eating dinner. And she loves a glass of wine with dinner. But when my sister brought her long-term, now like 6 or 7 year partner, Cal, over for the first time to mum's house, I wasn't there because she was still hiding him from me at that point. But the soundtrack of the evening was Stormzy's album, Gang Signs and Prayers. And I just remember, like, the story is Cal's like, you can imagine I walk into, and like, if you see my mum, if you've seen a photo of my mum, she's like, my mum is gorgeous. She does not look her age at all. She looks about 20 years younger, sort of long blondish, sort of brown hair, always got the lippy on, always done up, always very stylish. She does not look like the kind of woman that would be listening to Stormzy, Gang
Stormzy.
Signs and Prayers whilst, you know, serving up some kind of Italian dish. So dinners at mum's are always a hoot, let me tell you.
Well, you need to get her on the podcast.
You know what? I've been told this many a times because I speak about my parents a lot in relation to
Yeah.
my story. And my mum and dad have been separated for 13 years now, still great friends. And they're amazing people. And everyone says you've got to get them on. They're very confident, extroverted people, except when there's a camera around. So
Yeah.
I've got a bit of work to do, but we'll get them here
Yeah.
one day.
Yeah.
We'll get them
How
here one
good.
day. And it's probably an interesting segue, right? Like families, relationships. You've spoken about that dynamic potentially changing into the future. I'm interested, do you think the dynamic is just people are starting families later and people are creating families and that environment looks different? Or is it going to change altogether?
I think it could change altogether. Like if I look back at, as a futurist, you spend a lot of time or just as much time looking into the past, right? So if I think about how relationships have changed over time, like even in the last 50 or so years, we've seen the advancement and progress around women's rights. We've seen more around same-sex relationships and recognition and gay rights. We've seen much more open conversations around ethical non-monogamy or open relationships and polyamory and all that sort of stuff. So some real social drivers around how relationships have changed. And I think into the future, you'll still see some of those social shifts. I think we'll see more cohabitation and co-parenting. So this idea of, hey, let's have a kid together because I can see us going through and doing life together, but I don't see us getting married or being in a relationship or having sex together. So I see that sort of playing out. I think as we see, the aging population take off and people live longer, I think we'll see more of what they call the grey divorce, which is, actually separating in your 60s or whatever it might be, because you go, we've had a really great 30 years together, but I've got another 30 years ahead of me and I just don't think that it's with you, and that might be okay. So I think we'll see more of that. But I think a lot of the changes we'll see in the future around relationships will be driven by, well, not relationships, but more so like sex. Is that like taboo to talk about on here, or no?
No,
We're
go
good.
for
No.
it.
So like around stuff to do with sex will be like technology. So I think what's going to happen is like we're starting to see this fragmentation between like love and sex, and Dan Savage talks a lot about this. But like, we often put all our eggs in one basket, as in one person. Like, I want you to be the person that is the parent of my children, and I want you to be the sexiest person for the rest of my life, and I want you to be the only person that satisfies my sexual needs, and I want you to satisfy my emotional needs, and never shall we kind of explore outside of that. I think there's this recognition that and particularly you see it more in queer communities where they have more agency to sort of redefine what they want out of a relationship, because they're not like constrained by social norms and history and tradition, but like separating companionship and sex a little bit more. So if I kind of then go down the sex angle, and what I was saying about technology, like we're seeing more AI chatbots and AI intimacy chatbots, AI companion chatbots. There was like in 2018, it was pretty fascinating, a platform called Replica. So that's where people have like AI companions, but like developed really deep connections with the AI, where in 2018, the platform went down. And so like basically they couldn't, it was as if their girlfriend or boyfriend had died, and they genuinely thought it was as if their girlfriend or boyfriend had died. And there was this massive outcry and huge riot because of it. So there's that. You've got things like Karen AI, where you can pay by the minute to have like spicy chat with her and things like that. And then there's this growing market for AI sex bots as well, which is like massive in China. But basically like physical robots that people have sex with, but who also are able to like basically they're being trained through AI as well to be able to have conversations with you, and like so you can develop an emotional connection with them as well as a quote unquote physical connection. So there's sort of ways in which technology is sort of redefining what companionship in a relationship looks like as well.
AI sex robots. I've heard people speak about it. It's hard to imagine. I wonder, and this is an interesting conversation. I think that what's been, and for great reason, a real topic of conversation over the course of the last 12 months has been conversation around consent and safe sexual relationships, and these conversations that probably from generations of past maybe had gone a little bit missing, where people were expressing how they genuinely felt in sexual relationships to make sure they felt safe, and we were, not going down the route of, non-consensual sex and rape and these sort of terrible outcomes. I wonder if people are speaking to AI where emotion and emotional intelligence isn't exactly involved. And I know that there's probably models of AI that integrates better emotional intelligence than others. I wonder, do people lose the skills to then connect with other humans because there's a lack of emotional intelligence?
Um, Look, I think that's in line with a whole lot of stuff we're seeing around increased use of technology. Like, if I kind of step out of sort of the sex bot chat for a second, and I'll come back into it. Like there was some research that came out, I think it was last year, which found that more of Gen Z feel that they can be their most authentic selves online and in virtual worlds than in the real world, which is pretty telling that, you feel like you can be more authentic as an avatar in the metaverse, or, playing Fortnite or whatever it might be, than you are interacting with real life humans face to face in the flesh day to day. So I think there's something more broadly around, why is that, and what's sort of underpinning that, and therefore what's the risk around, do we lose some of those social skills and that EQ that comes with it? But then if I kind of think about it in the sense of like relationships, you've got people who, already might not have incredible social skills, or who might be painfully shy or super introverted, or find it really difficult to date, or maybe they're asexual and they want companionship, but they find it difficult to do that without attaching sex to it, which is what, a prospective partner might do. And so with AI, because it can kind of be crafted into a way to suit your needs, like it can really be beneficial for those kinds of people. And you're also seeing AI like being used almost like a relationship coach. I kind of think about it like Will Smith in that movie Hitch, but like basically like you can do like mock dates with AI, and it can give you feedback around like, hey, it was a little bit weird or creepy when you said I did that. Maybe don't do that in real life or whatever it might be. So like I again I kind of try and lean or kind of naturally lean into the silver linings or the glass half full or the good stuff to do with it. Not to kind of brush over the fact that, yeah, we definitely do need to think about the impact on developing, you know, those those human connections and those sort of social skills that come with it. But I think it hits a particular need for people who, you know, haven't been able to scratch that itch for a really long time.
Yeah, it's so interesting because part of me understands the view that you take because you like to find those and it's not even the view that you take, but it's I think you just like to highlight the optimistic. But part of me just worries about that loss of. But I guess we've always had that, right? And I think that even for most humans, you would say that you feel more comfortable in the areas you know you're fully accepted without judgment than you do out in public. Like, let
Yeah,
me
and like
tell you.
but I was gonna say though, like it's easy for you and me to say that, right? Because like I'm gonna make some assumptions here, but I'm assuming like, you know, you've got your partner and everything. You aren't uncomfortable having a conversation with someone or going on a date or like heaven forbid meeting someone professionally, romantically, whatever, for the first time and you know having to strike up a conversation and make small talk. So we kind of bring those assumptions and biases into our view around it. But there are some people who are in the minority, but for a, you know, that kind of person, that personality, that social disposition who for decades and centuries have been oppressed, for want of a better term, because they haven't been able to find that person or connection or experience because they're not like us. And so that's where I go. I think for that kind of group, I think that it's a positive thing. But just like any piece of technology, you just don't want to make sure it's exploited or used for the wrong reasons. And it kind of, you know, makes me think about what Esther Perel, and that's someone else who I'm a big fan of, what she talks about. She talks about AI in terms of artificial intimacy, and it's way, way more than just to do with sort of AI chatbots and sex bots and that sort of stuff. What she talks about is that we're basically in this modern loneliness epidemic at the moment, but it's completely masked because we're hyper connected. So we're always talking to people on, you know, 50 different forums, WhatsApp, text, phone, Instagram, Snap, email, like day in, day out. We're inundated with like connection, but it's not deep, meaningful connection. And so we're actually feeling the more connected than we've ever been as a society, but more lonely than we've ever been at the same time as well. And I think that's the bigger thing that we want to try and get on top of. And that's irrespective of sex and relationships. I think that's just where we're at with technology at large.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting conversation that needs to be had. And what's the answer? I think we're just going to have to play it out and figure it out, right? And it definitely comes down to an individual. It's having the individual sense of mind to assess whether it's helping you or it's pushing you deeper into that hole. And that's so hard with technology
Mm,
because I know that when I scroll on my phone in the morning, I just feel less present to begin the day. I feel almost more wired from the get go, and it's harder for me to relax early on. And I almost
yeah.
feel like work's already in front of me and I'm chasing my tail all day. But fucking hell, it's hard to put the phone down.
Yeah, because it's
Jesus.
it's it's a dopamine addiction. Like
Mm.
the way that it works, whether or not it's sort of algorithms with reels that recommend content, or this idea of you know, like I don't like something to do with me, right? Is like I get so overwhelmed by the amount of emails that I get, but then I keep checking my emails, almost wanting an email to come through because it's some kind of like someone wants me, someone wants something of me. It's like some kind of like weird validation. Like I think that, you know, we're in this environment where we're continually seeking that dopamine hit, so we're addicted to the dopamine hit, and the alternative is sitting in silence or the discomfort of normality, and, you know, actually stopping to smell the roses while we know that it's good for us. it's not going to give us that hit that we want, and that instant gratification. And so, like, I mean, little things for me, like I know, like, when I'm out to dinner, I'll leave my phone in my pocket, or if my phone's on a table somewhere, I'll always leave it face down so I'm not distracted or tempted to reach and use it. Or like, sometimes when I'm watching TV, I sometimes catch myself being like, hang on, I'm spending more time scrolling on my phone than actually watching it. Like, even though it's technology, either way, actually just going, no, I'm going to put my phone down and I'm going to concentrate on watching this. And it's just trying to catch yourself out doing little things like that, but particularly when you're with someone else, just trying to minimize the amount of time that you're on your phone and maximizing the time that you're with them.
Yeah, it's such a great point, mate. Guilty as charged there. I do the phone scrolling in front of the telly thing all the bloody time.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm the worst. I'm the biggest hypocrite. I don't know about you, but I love a movie. Like, I love a good film, and I would like to think I like the classics. Like, I love those 90s, early 2000s movies where they're
Wait,
just
you
different.
gotta give us some examples.
Okay, so I'd say probably top 5 off the top of my head would be, in no particular order because it changes from time to time, Catch
Yeah.
Me If You Can, starring Leo and Tom
Mm-hmm.
Hanks. Shawshank Redemption is up there for sure. Good Will Hunting, great movie.
Mm-hmm.
Interstellar, which is probably one of the more recent ones that I think was
Okay.
done really well. And I'll say 7 Pounds, Will Smith.
Oh, Will Smith one. I haven't seen that.
Very good movie.
I also have, okay, the other one I haven't seen, which I didn't want to admit because I think I'm the only person that hasn't seen it, is Shawshank Redemption. And it's my brother's favorite movie, and I still haven't seen it. I don't know why.
It's a very good movie. I think that a lot of people who haven't watched it and who didn't watch it before the last 5 years would probably struggle with the attention span that we
Is it
have
like quite
today.
slow?
It's not that it's quite slow, it's just a longer movie.
Right.
Like
This is the guy who escapes from prison or something, right?
correct, Andy
Yeah.
Dufresne. So Morgan Freeman. I actually don't know the main actor's name, which is funny, but he's great. I haven't really noticed him in too much else. But see, like, I love a good long movie. And when I encourage Soph to watch one of these movies, I'm like, darling, are you watching? Like, I'll do the thing where I'll pause it and I'll look at her and
Yeah,
go,
yeah, 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 yeah.
are you
Oh,
scrolling? And she's like, okay, I'll put my phone down. But if she wants to watch something, my phone's out. And I'm guilty as charged. I'm such a hypocrite. But we've got this need for dopamine now that I have very healthy outlets for dopamine. Like, I know, like yourself, I know you love your physical activity and you exercise. I'm the same. When I'm not suffering from the man flu, every day there is a huge portion of my day that is dedicated to being as active as possible. Even like, I'll park my car 3 blocks away from work just so I can get out, go for a walk, get some sunshine, do something physical. And I feel like that delayed gratification of walking to the car, knowing I got some time by myself, knowing I got some time out in fresh air. Like, I have very healthy outlets for dopamine, but I got some unhealthy ones too, let me tell you.
yeah, yeah, and we all do. And I think that when we think about technology and where we are today, I think a lot of us recognize it, and I think that's then where a lot of fear of technology comes from, because we think we kind of have a relatively unhealthy relationship with it. It's so codependent. Like, we know it's not necessarily healthy for us, like junk food, but we can't get enough of it, and we know we're going to get more and more of it. And that's where we start to get a little bit overwhelmed, or where we start to lean into more of the sort of negative narrative, that underpins it all.
Let's talk about play. You mentioned it very early on. Before we hit record, you and I, excuse me, had a conversation around the amount of travel you do for work. Now, I'm not talking about traveling for work, but I'm talking right now about what us Aussies love to do when the winter time rolls around, the very unharsh winter that we have here in Australia. We love to get on a plane and fly across the world, 20 odd hours to Europe and to these exotic destinations. What does the future of travel look like for us Aussies who are on long haul flights, which I know you've spoken about recently, and some potential changes there on planes?
Yeah, I mean, well, we as Australians love, Qantas every year or two come out with a direct flight option, whether it's to Paris, whether it's to Rome, whether it's to New York via Auckland, whatever it might be. Anything that makes the Northern Hemisphere more accessible. I think as we sort of go longer into the future, we're going to see a lot more around like supersonic air travel, where you'll be able to travel somewhere in, 6 hours on the other side of the world, and high speed rail as well, which will kind of mean that, say, for example, if you wanted to live in, Newcastle, which is a 2.5 hour drive north of Sydney, and it's a 3 hour train ride currently. Well, what if you could get there in 40 minutes? And therefore, it becomes a much more accessible option to live, to travel, to just, go there for lunch or something. So I think that we'll sort of start to see the ways that we can get there and whatever be a little bit more accessible. I think one thing that's really interesting that I've got my eye on at the moment is the ACTU, the Australian Council of Trade Unions, has put in a submission to Fair Work for it to become like the new normal, that in Australia you can take double leave at half pay. So this goes back to this idea about how as Australians we're obsessed with lifestyle. So 8 weeks of leave a year at half pay. So financially, organisations aren't any better or worse off, but it gives more flexibility and more options for people to take more leave and to normalise taking more leave, because we want to take more of it. And the research shows that, you really want to be taking more than a week to really get the benefits of it. Like if you want to kind of, mitigate burnout, improve mental health, detach from work, it really needs to be a 2 week or longer trip. But for a lot of people, when you factor in like people who work in corporates who have compulsory shutdowns, like over Christmas and New Year's, that can take almost half of your leave up. And then you do 1 2 week trip and that's it for the year. So I think that we're exploring, how can we have more holidays and take more leave? How can we get to places quicker? But I think what we're also seeing at the moment, particularly with cost of living as well, is a resurgence in terms of Asia for Australians. I think earlier this year I went to Tokyo and then went to the ski fields for skiing. So it was almost like the opposite. I left the Australian summer to go to the Japanese winter so I could ski. But at that point in time, I don't know if it's still the same sort of 6 months on, but Japan was the #1 tourist destination for Australians. It wasn't Italy, it wasn't sort of Europe or anything like that. It wasn't Canada, America, it was Japan. And so we're seeing a lot more people going to Thailand, to Bali, sort of wanting to get that break, go to a different region, experience a different culture, but in a way that's a little bit more friendly on the hip pocket as well.
I heard you speaking about the way that planes could change in the next couple of years, and particularly around the health initiatives or the health technology that's added to long haul flights. Can you allude on that a little bit more?
Oh, there's like things where they're exploring like the lighting that they put in planes, or because like for example, warm light is more conducive to sleep and that sort of thing. The ventilation within planes as well, so that sort of in terms of how we breathe and the respiratory stuff that influences quality of sleep and sleep inducement, and so airlines are looking at that, which is essentially, if you do go on long haul flights, how can we do it in a way so that you don't necessarily get to the other end and battle 2 days of jet lag to try and get over, and then you can start enjoying your holiday? How do you kind of walk off the plane feeling more refreshed, as if you haven't, just sort of suffered a hangover? So it's stuff that's sort of happening now that they're looking into, which isn't going to make the flight any quicker, but is going to hopefully make you feel better once you get off it at the other end.
Have you heard about New Calm, the sleep
Yes.
technology? I was
Yeah.
thinking about this, right? So Soph and I are currently exploring our option to next year elope and just go travel for 6 weeks instead in Europe. And we've never really done travel together. Like we've done a few small trips around Oz to, Queensland to Melbourne.
And
A
that's going
few
to
of
be
them.
quite telling then. You're wanting to do that after you get married. Surely that's the test to do beforehand, and then if you survive, then you get married.
Well, we've been living together from 2 weeks into our relationship, which
All
sounds
right, fair.
crazy to people. So we're very let's put it this way: she puts up with me, which is a great sign this far in. So we're looking at those options, and straight away I said to her, because I've been lucky enough to go overseas twice with family, or a couple times by myself, but twice on big European trips with my family. And I said, the thing that sucks the most is it almost feels like by the time you get out of jet lag and you've adjusted, You haven't slept on the way over. I don't know about anyone. I can't sleep in a car. I cannot sleep on a plane. So you have all these grand exotic ideas around we'll fly at night, we'll get there, we're well rested, and we just go about our lives. Certainly for me, that's not the case. And I was watching ultra runner Will Googe last year run across America, and he utilized new calm technology. I know you understand this, but for those listening who don't, essentially new calm taps into the brain waves that allow you to feel at rest that you would tap into when you sleep or in states of non-sleep deep rest. And it allows you over the course of 30 minutes to feel as though you've had 3 hours of deep sleep. And I was thinking about this technology and how I could utilize that to go on a European trip and feel more rested by the time I get there. And I wonder whether we'll see the implementation of things like new calm and these sleep technologies in long haul travel so that users just have a better experience.
Yeah, I think any airline that can crack that nut, I think absolutely has some kind of advantage to it. Because yeah, I've done the like that new calm thing before. Like I know at some gyms, like at my gym, they have like a recovery hub. So you have like Normatec boots and ice baths. And one gym I went to also had new calm on offer, and I was like, I'll give it a crack. Um, and I also had like a weighted blanket on while I did it as well. And it was super comfortable. Like I absolutely felt rested. People say, experts, and research shows that meditation actually helps, like quality meditation with like headspace or something like that is also restorative in terms of like gives you one more bar of energy if you think about it like a battery. And so I think we will start to see more of those kinds of things that we do on the ground where it could help in terms of quality of experience. And when you get off the plane at the other end, yeah, absolutely, like we'll see more and more of that.
It's almost like flight attendants rolling straight out of the safety briefing into guided meditation. Who knows? Who knows what the future holds? I like
Yeah,
it
too
though.
right.
I like it. Hey, before we finish up, then I'd be interested to hear, is there anything on your mind at the moment around life or the future, work or non-work related, that you think would be interesting to chat about?
um I mean, I'm still thinking about this going to your mum's house for dinner where I'm going to have lasagna, a nice salad, and cheesecake for dessert. Look, I think the thing that sort of is always sort of front and center for me, right, is like, indulge me for a second. It's to do with like the way our brains work and the neuroscience of negativity, and I think it's a really important thing to sort of bring to people's awareness, because the way that our brains operate, like, and why we seem to be so negative when we think about the future, is that if we go back into our past, our ancestors who were hunter gatherers were always on the lookout for anything that would threaten their survival. So you fast forward to where we are today, and our brains are actually hardwired to look out and to pay attention to more of the bad stuff than the good stuff. So, like as humans, we have between 50 to 70,000 thoughts every single day. 73% of the thoughts we have every single day are negative, and 92% of the thoughts that you have today are the exact same thoughts that you had yesterday. So we have a hell of a lot of thoughts. Most of them are negative, and the vast majority are the exact same thoughts as we had yesterday. So it's really easy for us to get stuck into this negative thought loop. And when we think about the future, we think about the future in a negative way 3 times more than we think about it in a positive way. And so the reason why I say that is just to say that we aren't necessarily giving ourselves a head start here. We're more inclined as humans to seek out bad news stories, to ask what if things go wrong, to really lean into the negative, and just to bring a little bit of balance to that, and to catch yourself out. And every now and then, instead of ask what if things go wrong, ask what if things go right. Or being conscious of your algorithm, and if you keep getting served stories about war and cyber attacks and recession and all of that stuff, not to discount it by any means, but think about maybe searching out for some of the good news stories, like the really cool innovations or stories of hope and progress that exist out there that might not be making its way into your newsfeed. Because I think it just is important that we try and balance that and get a little bit of a healthier outlook. Because as I said, the work that I do, I'm in the privileged position where day in, day out, I'm looking into this stuff. And so I have a lot of hope for the future, but my mates and the people I talk to, a lot less so. And so it's up to us. Like, I really think that optimism, it's not a reaction, it's a choice. And so I choose to be optimistic, and I just really encourage people to try and bring a bit of balance to sort of their outlook, the news they consume, the content that they come across, and whatnot as well, because your brain's not going to do it for you. Like it's kind of giving you a bit of a handicap.
Would you say that that is hardwired in you? Is that the way that you are and always have been, or has that been a
Yeah.
conscious choice?
No, like our brains are hardwired. Oh, do you mean for me personally though?
Yeah, the way that you're wired.
No, it's a conscious choice. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I also have suffer from anxiety, and so I'm definitely someone who's inclined to kind of spiral down rabbit holes of all the catastrophic things that could potentially go wrong, and the 1% chances of X eventuating. But it's absolutely like a conscious choice, and something that I have to do deliberately, and it's not easy by any means. But there are like some really simple things and hacks you can do, like for example, on Instagram, instead of just following, like, as far as sort of like pages go outside of sort of your friends and celebrities, like I follow news pages, right? Because that's partly like I get my news off social media, like your Sydney Morning Heralds or your the briefing podcast and all of that sort of thing. But then I also balance it with like other pages that kind of give me the stories of hope and the really warm and fuzzies and the nice stuff, which isn't to be naive, but it's just to recognize that a lot of the news is really negative, and it's necessary to be across, but it's negative. And so just making sure that I'm not continually just reinforcing that message, that as I'm scrolling through my feed every now and then, there's a story about how they've come up with a new kind of technology in healthcare that can diagnose Alzheimer's 9 years before human clinicians can, or that they've just created a vaccine that can cure some types of cancers that's going through clinical trials. And like, that's the sort of stuff that I think is really cool and really inspiring. And I don't have to necessarily go out of my way and try and search out that stuff. I just simply by following a few pages, it comes up in my newsfeed, and it's it's just a way of trying to hack the system in a way, but just to try and bring a bit of balance to it, so I'm not just continually reinforced with all the shit stuff that's happening around the world.
It's a very good point, mate. And I think the world needs more of your optimism. Optimism certainly is infectious. And, I love that. I love that about it. If you are conscious enough for anyone who's listening or watching to choose to be optimistic when you wake up in the morning. And I notice this in my own life. One thing I've been thinking about lately is if I was able to observe myself and my daily actions as an outsider, what assumptions or observations would I make? And there are days where certainly I think about that frame of mind and I think about that exercise. And I know that when I lead with optimism and positivity, everything about my day is better. And so I think that's such an encouragement for everyone listening and watching to just lead with optimism, lead with positivity, try to start things off on the right foot and get out of the right side of bed in the morning. And everything about life is certainly more exciting when you're doing that. So, Ben, I really appreciate you coming on. Very interesting chat today. God, I feel like we went in every different direction, but it was great. It kept it interesting for people who are listening and starting to understand what you do for work. And mate, I'm looking forward to seeing you speak live one day. I'll bring you a piece of lasagna and cheesecake, and we can continue the conversation.
Well, hopefully by then I've seen the Shawshank Redemption, so we can chat about that as well.
Mate, so good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brad.